So look, this case is solvable, but I'm going to throw a twist into it. Even if you could solve it, you couldn't charge the suspect.
Years of JonBenét theories, and almost nobody ever asked the first question an investigator is supposed to ask. Morgan Wright has spent years reconstructing this case from the ground up. Before he explains why no one can be charged, he has to explain how it went wrong on the first morning.
Boulder, Colorado, December 26, 1996. A father finds the body of his dead 6-year-old daughter in the basement of their residence. Cause of death? Blunt force head trauma and strangulation. 30 years later, here we are. And the JonBenét Ramsey murder remains unsolved, even after massive investigations, dozens of theories. To state the obvious, I think this case is marked by so many very strange and highly unusual circumstances. And when we have on Heroes Behind the Badge, when we have a complicated situation like this, we call Morgan Wright, the founder of the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases. Hi, Morgan.
I thought you were going to call it Ghostbusters. So,
well, we could do that too, but we're going to call you first. Welcome back to Heroes Behind the Badge. But Morgan, before we dive into this strange unsolved mystery and the strange circumstance of this case, most people probably don't know this, or if they did know it, they don't remember. There were actually 2 people indicted in this case, a grand jury indictment. Each of them had 2 counts each. Can you tell us the story of the indictments? Why nobody knew about it? They were unheard of for like 13 or 14 years. Why they stayed secret for so long, and why we never heard of it.
This is probably one of the most problematic areas of the case because you impanel a grand jury. And of course, to this day, the grand jury information is still secret. But they started looking at some enterprising reporters at the Boulder Daily Camera, along with the Denver Post, started looking at stuff. And even according to what Alex Hunter said in his press conference, he says the grand jury has done its work. He never mentioned the fact whether a true bill was received or not. So for the folks out there that are not quite familiar, you go to a grand jury, you get a true bill. It means everybody said, yes, indict the person, or yes, right. Indict a true bill. And if there's no bill, it means that they said, nope, there's not enough here to indict them. And the old joke is you can indict a ham sandwich in a grand jury. But
yes.
but here's the thing, though. The reporters started digging into this. They realized that even with a grand jury, while the proceedings of the grand jury are secret, the results of the true bill or no true bill were supposed to be publicly available information. Right. And so they kept drilling down on this. It took 14 years and several FOIAs and lawsuits, Freedom of Information Act, and lawsuits to finally disclose is that an indictment was returned against both John and Patsy Ramsey, and the charges were for indicted on child abuse resulting in death, count 4A, and then accessory to a crime, count 7. What Alex Hunter did is he refused to sign the indictment. He refused to sign, basically effectively killing the indictments. The proper procedure would have been to sign the indictments, because that was the verb, publish it, and then refuse to prosecute. But by doing that, he did it under the guise of keeping the grand jury proceedings under the guise of being secret, but it's not supposed to be secret. The results, whether it was a true bill or not, that's publicly available information.
So just the proceedings in the grand jury, not the outcome of their findings, right?
Yeah, because imagine this: you go to a grand jury, and I indict you, Dennis, and it's secret. That's like Animal House, double secret probation. No, that's not the way it works. The proceedings are secret. The outcome is not. We now you might hold on. We know that in federal cases, you hold on to an indictment until you're ready to make the arrest. But at some point, you have to publish that. The indictment's published. You can see the bill of particulars, all of those different things.
Why wouldn't Alex Hunter sign the indictment then?
Craig, I wish I knew. I think there was a lot of issues with social influence, power, perceived, status in society.
Yeah.
I just and look, as an aside, a few years after that, I was teaching interview and interrogation for John Reed and Associates. I taught some of the guys from Boulder that were involved in the case. So there are some. I don't know why he did it. I mean, he's got his own motivations. He spins it. He said, and like we were talking, Dennis, he passed away.
Yeah.
So we may never really know. But Craig, I wish I could answer that. I think it was an attempt to shelter. The only thing I conclude out of it, because I don't have all the facts, but if I'm looking at it from the outside, the only thing I conclude based on the fact that the people were indicted, and we're going to get into the whole case, because guys, I've been working on this for a long time.
All right.
Is that it was done to shelter John and Patsy Ramsey because of their position in society.
Interesting.
And Morgan, I just want to jump in because you just said that you've been digging into this for a long time. So tell us why you're involved in this, why you showed interest in this, and what you're doing.
So believe it or not, one of my friends, he's actually a producer for Mark Levin on Fox News. He's a showrunner, and I've known him. And we started thinking about, could we do a show called Inside True Crime? And we'd actually filmed about 7 or 8 episodes, and then guess what happened? COVID. So everything got shut down, the studio we were using. But I'll tell you, here's the thing that bothers me. I was a detective when JonBenét Ramsey was killed. And then a few years later, I did this. We'll do an analysis of the case, and I'll remain neutral in terms of the analysis because it's based on first principles. But I have a hard time when I look at the facts of the case. These are facts. These are not in dispute. These are established facts. See, there's 4 categories of knowledge. It's established, strongly implied, contested, and permanently unknowable. The facts of the case that are established is that right after JonBenét's body was found, John Ramsey tried to get his family on a plane and fly them to Atlanta. They were going to miss her autopsy. They were going to not be there for the inquiry by law enforcement. So my first thought is simply as a father is, who does that? If my child, God forbid, was found dead, what do you need from me? You want my hair? You want my blood? You want my fingerprints? My house is yours. And then as this went on, I'll tell you the other thing that bothered me is he is treated as some kind of folk hero because he goes to CrimeCon, he goes to these other places. And look, I'm having the same issue with the Kohberger case. I've actually been working with Fox Digital on some articles rebutting everything the quote defense expert said during trial. He said, nope, Kohberger wasn't there at all, wasn't. Now he's saying, oh no, he was there because he's pimping out a book and he's got a training course that he's doing. So I have a problem from a motivation standpoint. I didn't know it at the time, but I learned it later when I was reading Michael Connolly in the Harry Bosch series. He has a great statement: either everybody counts or nobody counts. And I reached the point where I said, I'm sick and tired of seeing somebody pimp out their daughter's death for continued notoriety. That's what drove me to do this. But I had to be careful because, okay, that's one side of the brain. The other side of the brain says, okay, doesn't matter what you believe, it only matters what must be true. So I started digging into it and I started assembling everything. And I looked at the reconstructions they did on TV. I looked at the video that Lou Smith did. And I started realizing there were some basic fundamental flaws in everybody's approach. And I said, if I was investigating a case, how would I investigate it? And when I started digging into it, I came up with several things that said, here's what it boils down to, Dennis. It's a binary question. Either there was an intruder or there was no intruder. And if there was no intruder, it meant it was a staged crime scene and somebody inside the house killed JonBenét. Right. It's that simple. Suspects are downstream artifacts. All this stuff about DNA, everything else is misdirection. It's smoke and mirrors. The real question you have to ask is, was there an intruder or was there no intruder? It's similar when we talked about the Guthrie case. Right. Either was a burglary gone wrong or it was never a burglary, right? Yep. And so for me, you have to answer that right up front. And the minute you answer that, it informs everything else about the case.
Morgan, there's probably some people in our audience who weren't around in 1996, okay? May not even be familiar with the JonBenét Ramsey case. Those of us that were adults at that time followed it closely. We know the basics. But I think it's important at this point, give us a timeline, if you would, a brief timeline of what happened. You know, when were police notified? All the strangeness of this case, maybe lumped into a couple-minute description, if you could.
Yeah, sure. And so when I do my shows, we were talking, Craig, the crime reconstructed. The first day is always what's the inherited case or the inherited verdict. So what case did we inherit here? So if you go back and just look at the victimology of JonBenét Ramsey, she was in a lot of beauty pageants. She was a up and coming beauty queen, that her mother, some might say living vicariously, because Patsy Ramsey was Miss West Virginia back in her day. So there was some concern about was she living vicariously through JonBenét's life, because she was in all of these different beauty pageants. And she really was. She was, the sad part is when she's made up, it's like, as a father of my youngest is a daughter, I'm going, okay, but anyway, that being said, she was, child. She had an older brother, Burke, who was about 3 years older than her. And so there's all of that history. There's a lot of stuff I don't want to get into because, really it detracts away from the story because people have talked about Burke and issues there. That's okay. Because my central question I want to answer, was there an intruder or not? But back to your point, Craig. So what happens is on December 25th, now we're coming up on the 30th anniversary, December 26th, 2026 will be the 30th anniversary of JonBenét's death. So JonBenét was 6 years old. They were living in Boulder, Colorado, when at 5:53 a.m., Patsy Ramsey made a 911 call saying that they had found a ransom note, that her daughter had been taken. And this is what started the whole thing off. It's the 911 call. And there's a lot of research and analysis that's been done about the 911 call as well, because what a lot of people don't remember back in that time, when all the lines were copper, not like they are now where some of them are fiber and a lot of people just have wireless. But in those old systems, the minute you dialed the last one, 911, and it connected, it started recording automatically. Many cases have been made on the conversations that happened before the 911 operator picked up. So there are conversations on that tape as well that led into things. But 5:53, first officer on the scene, Patsy shows up to the door. She's still fully dressed in what she was wearing the night before. And they start this whole thing. We found a ransom note. We are a foreign faction. Actually, James Kolar was an investigator assigned later for the Boulder County DA to investigate this case. He wrote a book called Foreign Faction about the whole JonBenet case. And so that's how this thing got started, Craig, is that it started with the report. Their daughter was missing. They assigned people there. So this thing goes on for 6 hours before they finally decide, hey, look, let's search the house. And so I'm going to put a pin in something right here. The biggest fundamental mistake, look, when you're first officer on the scene, you have two duties and two duties only. Preservation of life, number one. Protection of the crime scene, number two. Inviolate. But if you got somebody that needs life-saving, you might trample over evidence. Preservation of life is number one. What would you have done? Well, when I work crime scenes, everybody out of the house. Everybody out of the house. I have to control the entire scene, but the family was left in there. So when they said, let's go searching, and here's something that is really going to be, it's heartbreaking, and I know for the officer, because the first officer that went searching, he went downstairs to the room where JonBenet was eventually found. He pulled on the door. It wouldn't open. Why? Because at the very top was a wooden block, a clasp that was like on a nail or screw, and then you turned it to prevent the door from opening. First place John Ramsey went down to search was that room, opened it up, found JonBenet. She had duct taped over her mouth, had a garrote around her neck, and her hands were tied together, and she was found facing face up. That's going to be a critical clue later. But that's the premise of how this whole thing got started. And then it morphed into one of the largest investigations Boulder PD ever did. And obviously it got the notoriety, it got the national attention. And this thing has been a mainstay of true crime and books and conspiracy theories ever since. But for me, I'm a country boy from Kansas, an old farm boy. For me, it boils down, it's very simple. Either there was an intruder or there wasn't. And if there was never an intruder, it's a staged crime scene and somebody inside the house killed JonBenet. That's as simple as it gets.
So you've talked about the ransom note, and one of the things that I've heard, and you can tell us if this is correct, that ransom note was a lengthy ransom note, which is unusual for that sort of thing. And it was written on stationery that was found in the house. The person apparently had access to the stationery and wrote this note apparently while sitting in an occupied dwelling. Is any of that true?
Yeah. So actually, it was a legal pad, one of the yellow legal pads, and the Secret Service actually, who was very good at paper and ink, because counterfeiting, that's what they do. They determined that those pages came from inside one of the legal pads, and that a pen that was in there was the source of the ink that was on the pad. Now,
wow.
I will tell you this. Here, I'll show this because I know you folks are watching this. So here's what I do every morning. Every morning I write in my journal. So I have a journal that I write in. It's actually the Knights Templar Creed too, if you guys know that. So, but I write this. I just write 1 page a day. If I'm going at a regular pace, that takes me anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes, writing in my own handwriting, writing in my own style without attempting to disguise it. This thing was 2.5 pages long. And if you tried to rewrite this and disguise your handwriting, it would take you 35 to 45 minutes to do that. So when we start talking about the timeline, you have to account for that note was written inside the house in an attempt to disguise the handwriting, and it would have taken at least 35 to 45 minutes. How do we know that? Not only have they done it on TV, but they've recreated it. I would challenge anybody, take that ransom note, get it online, and sit down and try and write out the ransom note and disguise your handwriting, and then time yourself. See how long it takes.
Well, interesting.
Morgan, I have a question. I mean, I'm confused now because you said Patsy, when she greeted the police officer at the door, was wearing the same clothes as she was wearing the night before. That would perhaps indicate that she never went to bed, never put her night clothes on. Very strange. Also, 5:53 in the morning. Why would you even be awake at 5:53 in the morning, let alone go searching and find a ransom note and realize your daughter's been? This makes no sense to me. Help me.
Yeah. And so, Craig, you bring up a point when I talked about first principles. One of the things I believe in, there's a book written by a guy named Daniel Kahneman. He passed away. He was actually a psychiatrist,
Right.
but he won the Nobel Prize for economics, believe it or not. But he wrote a book called Thinking, Fast and Slow. And what you're talking about, Craig, is system one thinking. We see a scene, we see things, and we want it to make sense. So we use shortcuts and we use heuristics to, well, help me make a story. Help me tell me something that makes sense. The harder thing to do is the system two thinking. It's to take the time. It's more of a cognitive load on your brain and to actually think through. So what happened? Yes, she showed up to the door. So if you knew Patsy Ramsey at all, and the people talked about it, it did. She was very fashion conscious, very fastidious. Rarely, nobody, and they went to, when they did depositions later, this was brought out. She had to explain away why she did that. But nobody that they knew of saw her wear the same outfit twice in a row, ever. So, but the other thing too is to get up and get completely dressed and put on your lipstick and come downstairs dressed the same way you were the night before. You start asking yourself again, what is the purpose of doing that? And so to your question, Craig, is it plausible? So I deal in, a lot of people say, well, what's your theory? I try and keep it to, if I say it's a hypothesis, then a hypothesis is something I can test. And my whole purpose for testing it is to test it to failure. If it doesn't fail, it's like load-bearing walls in a house. I test it. If it's load-bearing, fine. It can now support the case. But if it's not load-bearing, it needs to be gotten rid of. So I started testing all of those things. And when you take her actions then combined with her testimony later, there's a lot of incongruity between what she said she did and what she did. And this is interesting. What she did was she purposefully wore the same outfit 2 days in a row to say, hey, see, sometimes I wear the outfit 2 days in a row. So it was a staged event. Why would you stage an event? So, I mean, but that gets into, again, those, and to your point, Craig, there's a lot of inconsistency. So I said the easiest way to solve this is at the very beginning of it. Either there was an intruder or there wasn't an intruder. And that's where I focused my time, because if I can show that there was not an intruder, then everything else can be explained away as part of a staged crime scene, a cover-up to this day.
Was there ever any evidence that there was a noise that awoke her? Or again, 5:53 in the morning. I'm not awake at 5:53 in the morning. Most normal people aren't. They were out.
To speak for yourself, Craig.
Well, he said normal people too, Dennis.
Yeah, that's true.
How did she ever explain that away, though? That she was up at 5:53 in the morning to find a ransom note? That, again, I'm totally confused by that.
Well, let me share something with you, and this will give you the extent of how tough this is. So I've shared a screen, and I've got everything in there that deals with this, and so. On here, I've got the John. What I did is to kind of get to your point. How do you explain all this? Because you have to reconcile what they said then with what they said later. So I went through, and I use AI for a lot of this. I do a lot of my analysis with AI. I create what's called skills and structured ways to do this. So I got access to the Boulder Daily Camera Archives, the Denver Post. And so I found every piece of information related to this case and I archived it. So I have 930 newspaper articles, 31 primary PDFs to include the autopsy and the coroner's report, 14 transcribed documents. These are long transcribed documents, 7 crime scene videos. One of them I'm going to show you later that goes into what you have to look at in order to determine if there was an intruder or not. 38 crime scene photos. This is all publicly available. I have no access to anything that law enforcement has not intentionally published or has not made it into the public. I have no access to their actual files. For floor plans, I have 390 book highlights. I read almost every book on JonBenét that there was out there, even the kook stuff. And I bookmarked a lot of stuff. And so I have over 1,000 total assets that I looked at in terms of analyzing this. And if you'll see here, I did analysis of the ransom note, full text, autopsy report, grand jury indictment, 911 call transcript, Boulder police report. You can see down here insider accounts and resignation letters from Steve Thomas. He resigned over this. Forensic science, all this Colorado Bureau of Investigation lab reports. So when I say that I've looked at this, I mean I've gone through analytically and scientifically and put everything in order so that when I say something, I can now trace it back to exactly what I'm referring to. And it's got a foundation. It's no different than when I testified in court. You have to have to establish a foundation. I want to enter something into evidence. Well, first of all, you have to establish the foundation. Where did you find it? How did you find it? How did you handle it? Show me the chain of custody. Once you establish foundation, then you can enter that in. So everything I taught, the suitcase under the window, the crime scene area, the video, the book research, daily camera, complete archive, contextual analysis. I mean, yeah. So the other thing I'm going to show you too, when we get into here, I actually did, I did analysis of the temperature. I did analysis of the solar light, and I did analysis of sunrise, because that all factors into reading the crime scene note. And I looked at all of the specials done. Nobody has done this. To this day, nobody has done what I'm about to show you guys here.
So before you show us that, I just want to say one thing in furtherance of what you're doing. So you're the CEO of the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases. So you're working on cold cases. You're working to help find the most wanted criminals, any number of things. We've talked to you about this before, and you've developed all kinds of special technologies, reverse engineering investigations. So the reason, and for our listeners to understand why you know so much and why you're so involved in this particular case, is because this is what you do. And you are basically reverse engineering this investigation. You've investigated, you've researched this extensively, and you're also writing a book about the JonBenét Ramsey case. So I think it's important for our listeners to understand why you're so involved in this.
Well, personally, it's personal. Either everybody counts or nobody counts, right? And as a father, I cannot allow a victim. And look, this is the problem I have with much true crime. They monetize the grief of others. They don't give a crap about the families. They sensationalize it. It's about clicks. It's about gore. We're the only show that I know of that when I do Crime Reconstructed, that when we do a case, we enter the case into our home system. So I come from Kansas. One of my good friends is the assistant director now of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. We got to talking about one of their cases they had that's called the Dolly Madison murders. Mary Drake and Mandy Alexander happened back in Great Bend, Kansas, 25 years ago. So I went through and I broke down the whole case as to what we do. So first day is the inherited case. What's the case we have right now, right? Second day is the assumption stack. We name all the assumptions in the case. Third day is we stress test all those assumptions. The fourth day is we categorize everything into those 4 categories of knowledge: what's established, what's strongly implied, what's contested, what's permanently unknowable. And then Thursday night, what we do on Thursday night is first officer on scene. How would you handle it? What do you do? And then Friday is the after action. So we do a complete breakdown of the case, but we don't do it just to talk about it. It's actually, if you go to openunsolved.org, if you go to our website, you'll see all the active cases. In the active cases is Mary Drake and Mandy Alexander. We just don't talk about the case. We're here to solve the case. We don't sensationalize. So when you listen to the podcast, there's no profanity. We don't do gory pictures. None of that stuff. This is about breaking down. And this week we're doing J.C. Dugard. Kidnapped for 18 years, I think 3 months and 2 days. And we looked at the failure of the California parole system. I don't know. That's a case we could talk about sometime. But they visited, and I never use the suspect's name in my show. I call him Lord Voldemort, the name that shall not be mentioned. But they visited his property 16 times and thought his property ended at an interior fence, and JC was being held in a house. Every time they were there, they were within feet of JC Dugard. So we break it down it's not to second guess people. It's to say, what can we learn from these cases to ensure that we don't repeat these things again in the future? So Friday is always the after action. What's our methodological finding? Same thing with JonBenét. What can we learn from this case to ensure that it never happens again?
You mentioned earlier as you were scrolling through about a resignation or resignations. Interesting. That kind of piqued my curiosity. Are we talking about law enforcement or the investigators?
The primary detective at that time, Detective Steve Thomas, resigned, and then he wrote a book. Of course, a lot of people did. The friends, but you also had good friends of John and Benét Ramsey, Fleet and Priscilla White. They wrote letters calling into question the Ramsey's veracity over it. And then Chief Mark Beckner did a Reddit, an AMA Ask Me Anything, where they talked about this as well, too. So there are some very interesting outcomes out of this. Look, this case is solvable, but I'm going to throw a twist into it. Even if you could solve it, you couldn't charge the suspect.
And why is that?
Well, how about we walk through the case? Let me use that as the tease, and let's walk through the case, and I'll show you at least one of my main hypothesis. Because again, it goes back to right. If there's no intruder, then it's somebody in the house who killed JonBenét, and it's a staged crime scene. So
I'd love to see both. You make the case. Let's we start with either one, but let's go over the evidence to support it was an intruder. What evidence might lead you in that direction, and what evidence would lead you to believe there was no intruder and somebody in the house actually committed the crime.
Well, see, and that's where when I took a look at everything, you keep an open mind. But now that I boiled it down, I'll kind of give the ending away without revealing all the twists. But with me, I cannot establish beyond reasonable suspicion that there was an intruder. So in my mind, that hypothesis fails on several reasons. The only hypothesis that survives is there was no intruder for a variety of reasons. In fact, let's do a basic one before I share the screen here. When they've done all of these the first thing they do is they show everything is about the intruder coming in through the broken window that's in the basement, slid into the basement, and that's how everything happened. Stepped on a suitcase, and then wrote the ransom note, kidnapped JonBenét from her bed, killed her, left her in the what they called the wine room, and there's a whole story behind that. So the first thing I did, so when I looked at all of these reconstructions, what I said was they're missing one thing. So let me share my screen with you and let me show you. So I actually pulled all of the data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and I mapped out. I said, okay, what was the weather on that night? So let me ask you guys. So we know that the Ramseys got home between 9:30 and 10. So I mapped out everything based on NOAA data. And so at 11:53. This is 11:53 p.m. The temperature was 5 degrees, the wind speed was 6.9 miles per hour, and the wind chill was -7. You are, and the National Weather Service calls that danger if you have exposed skin. Frostbite can occur in 30 minutes if you stay in that zone. So let me ask you, either one of you. Well, and yeah, look, let me ask my friend from Canada. When it's cold up there and it's midnight, how are you if you're walking around outside? Just take a shot. How are you dressed?
Quite warm.
Well, just don't. I'm going to press you on that. Just don't tell me quite warm. Tell me how you're dressed. What are you wearing?
Wearing a jacket. You're wearing gloves, perhaps a hat.
What kind of pants? What kind of boots? What kind of shoes?
Yeah, long pants and warm shoes or warm boots.
Okay. So if we kind of take that as a point in time, let's say that they're home and we know that this has to occur after they get home. You know, now some people say, well, he broke into the house prior. Doesn't matter. What I'm about to show you is the same thing, right? So every reconstruction they did, when they did it on CBS and when they showed Lou Smith doing it, when they slid in through the window, they were dressed in regular street clothes. They were not dressed the same way somebody would have been dressed in Boulder, Colorado on December 25th or December 26th, starting at 11:53 at night, going till 5 in the morning. And as we go through this, you can see here that we stay the entire time you're in the danger zone. For wind chill is below 0 degrees. So the wind chill is 4.6 minus 4.6. You see that? So temperature gets down to 3 degrees. And if you can see here on this, you can see that the temperature drops that whole time. The wind chill kind of stays the same, and so the wind speed stays the same about kind of, and then the wind chill. Guys, it's cold out there. So I ask you, is it plausible to think that somebody is walking around at 3 o'clock in the morning dressed the same way that everybody who did the reconstruction did, which is in just a pair of slacks and a shirt? No coat, no boots, no gloves, no hat. Is it plausible? Can you in your mind think that yeah, that's the way somebody normally does it? So that was the first thing that said, okay, we've got a problem with that. So then the second thing, and I did the lunar light analysis. This is going to get into the issue of the ransom note too. So I said, okay, how much light do we have? When does it wax? When does it wane? What stages does it go through? So, and then the other thing I looked at too is based on the house, the direction it looked at, where was the moon coming from? Where was it going to? Because you're also going to look at where did the sunrise come from. So I'm going to stop right here for a second. I'm going to show you this real quick, this video here. I'm going to go back just a few seconds on it. Because there is, so now we have to get into, for our crime scene nerds, there is a French criminologist by the name of Locard. This is back 19th century. But he developed what's called Locard's transfer principle. And this is how touch DNA works, right? So, Craig, if you and I met somewhere and we shook hands, anytime you come in contact with something, you leave something and you take something. So we shake hands, I leave my touch DNA, my epithelial cells on you or on your shirt if I pat you on the back, and you leave something with me, right? So when we look at what's in the window, and there are pictures of it too, I won't show tons of pictures on that, but I'm going to show this. But when you look in the window and you see how, guys, so it's dirty, right? So you think of something, an outside exterior window well that's going to be capturing dirt and leaves and everything. Now you're dressed in clothing, like you said, what you do up in Canada. You got the hat, you got the jacket, or at least gloves, right? Warm stuff. If you climb down into that well, which I've got the exact dimensions of the window well, what it would take to actually climb through that door, what are the chances that you could slide through that window and not drag any debris in with you? That's
Slim
called
to none.
Yeah, that's Locard's transfer principle. So let me just play a little bit of this video here. So if we go, as they say in the movies, let's go to the video. I want you to watch something here real quick. You see that the flashlight's showing, and I'm going to stop it here at one point, and I want you to take a look at something. This is the window well where the supposed, or the intruder was alleged to have come through. What do you see down in the bottom left hand of that window?
You'll have to tell us because it's hard to distinguish.
Yeah.
It's a cobweb. When you see the pictures, it is a cobweb. How do cobwebs get there? Cobwebs get there because of lack of use, right? What are the chances? And this window well, I've got the dimensions on it, and I looked at, said, how small would you have to be to climb through that window? It's just, it's not even supportable at that point. So anybody dressed in clothing that would match the time of morning climbing in through that window, not only are they going to drag leaves in with them and debris, they're going to they're going to damage and basically wipe out that cobweb.
And do you know the dimensions of the window?
Yes, I do. Let me go back to my, I don't remember. Look, at my age, my mind's like a bookshelf. It only holds so many books. You put one on and another one falls off. So let me find the, I'll find this as we're talking, right? So I'll
What,
find
was the window broken, Morgan?
Yes,
I
the
thought
window
it was
was
a
broken.
broken window. Yeah.
because John Ramsey was on a business trip one time and he was locked out of the house. So the way he got in was lifting up that grate that sat on top of that window well and kicking out the window and then climbing in through that. Now that's the way that they say that the intruder got in, and that's the way also that they say the intruder got out. So when I got to this point, I looked at, okay, what's the weather? What's Locard's transfer principle tell us? What do we see there that is any indicia that somebody climbed through that window well? There's no scuff marks on the wall. There's no debris on the windowsill. There's no debris on the floor, and the cobweb is still intact. I ran both hypotheses. Okay, how small would you have to be, and what would you have to do? It became very improbable because I've worked crime scenes. I've worked lots of crime scenes. I've worked them on burglaries. Locard's principle. You enter in, you take something with you when you enter in, and you take something with you when you leave. So that windowsill is in the same state it was as the day before. So when I looked at that, the only conclusion I could come up with is nobody came in through the window because of Locard's transfer principle. Even when you look at the demonstrations that were done, they were all done just wearing street clothes, not wearing the clothes that we talked about you would need at 3:00 in the morning. And there's no debris, nothing in the window to indicate that anybody. You would have to be sitting down, putting your legs through there, and then sliding your butt through the window. You're going to drag so much debris through there. It's going to be littered all over the windowsill and all over the floor. There is zero. When you look at the rest of the video and the pictures, there is zero on the floor. There's nothing. There's no leaf debris. There's nothing. So at my point, when I stopped right there, I said, what's the more logical, again, what can I prove at this point? Doesn't matter what you believe, it only matters what you prove. And that gets back to the point, as you're saying, Craig, let's take a look at both. When I stopped right there, I said, there's nothing from this point that I can plausibly infer that there was an intruder that came in through that window, considering how they would have to be dressed, considering how cold it was, and considering the evidence that would have had to have been left and the evidence that would have been destroyed, which is that cobweb by sliding in through the window.
If there was no intruder, then everything police spent 30 years chasing was downstream of a question nobody answered first. Next time, what the crime scene actually says happened.